The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden hue over the village of Tambuwal. Inside their small, clay-walled home, Zainab stood by the kitchen fire, stirring a pot of stew. The aroma of spices filled the room, but her mind was elsewhere. She could sense the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. Ibrahim, her husband, had been pacing back and forth for what felt like hours. She could tell that something weighed heavily on his mind. Finally, he stopped, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her grip the wooden spoon a little tighter. "Zainab," he began, his voice low but firm, "I have thought long and hard about this." Zainab turned to face him, her heart sinking. She knew this tone, the stern resolve that often preceded his harshest words. "What is it, Ibrahim?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with apprehension. He took a deep breath, his face set in a grim expression. "This child you are carrying," he said slowly, "if it is not a boy, you will leave this house." The words struck her like a blow. She stared at him, trying to comprehend what she had just heard. "Leave?" she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "But why, Ibrahim? What have I done to deserve this?" "It is not about what you have done," he replied, his tone growing colder. "It is about what you have failed to do. 3 daughters, Zainab, 3, and no son. A man needs a son to carry on his name, to inherit his land, to honor his legacy." Zainab felt her chest tighten. "Ibrahim," she said softly, struggling to keep her composure, "the gender of a child is not something I can control. It is in God's hands." "Enough," he snapped, his voice rising. "I am tired of hearing that excuse. If you cannot give me a son, then you have no place here. My mother was right. A man without a son is like a tree without roots. I will not let my name die out because of you." Tears welled up in Zainab's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She turned back to the pot, her hands trembling. "I will pray for a son," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "You had better," Ibrahim muttered, turning on his heel and walking away, his footsteps echoing through the small house. "Or you and those daughters of yours will be out on the streets." Months passed, and Zainab's belly grew round and heavy. She prayed every day, not for herself, but for her children. She knew the gravity of her situation. Ibrahim had grown more distant, his cold stares and harsh words becoming a daily torment. His mother, who visited often, only made things worse. "Remember what I said," Ibrahim's mother would hiss when Zainab passed by. "If this one is not a boy, you will regret it." Zainab kept her silence, swallowing her pain like bitter medicine. She did not want to lose her home, her children's stability, and what little she had built. She knew that fate was beyond her control, but she hoped that somehow Ibrahim would come to his senses. The day of labor arrived. The midwife hurried to their home, and Zainab was soon in the throes of childbirth. Ibrahim waited outside, his face a mask of impatience and anxiety. His mother stood beside him, muttering prayers under her breath. Hours later, the wails of a newborn filled the air. The midwife stepped out, her face solemn. "It is a girl," she said softly. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ibrahim's face contorted in anger. Without another word, he stormed into the house, where Zainab lay exhausted, cradling the tiny, crying infant. "Another girl?" he shouted. "You have failed me for the last time, Zainab. Pack your things and leave." Zainab looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion, pain, and resolve. "Ibrahim, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling, "do not cast us out. We are your family." "You have no place in my house anymore," he declared, his voice seething with contempt. "You and these girls are a curse upon me." His words were final. Zainab felt the tears burn her cheeks as she looked down at her newborn daughter, Fatima, and then at her other girls, Aisha, aged 10, and Mariam, aged 7. She could see the fear and confusion in their eyes, but she needed to be strong. She had no choice. Without another word, Zainab gathered what little belongings they had and took her daughters by the hand. Together, they left the only home they had ever known, stepping into an uncertain future. The outskirts of Tambuwal were harsh and unforgiving. Zainab found a small, run-down house to rent, its walls barely holding up against the elements. She worked tirelessly, taking up any job she could find, washing clothes, cleaning homes, and selling simple handmade goods. The village people looked upon her with a mixture of pity and disdain, but Zainab did not falter. She was determined to raise her daughters with dignity and strength. "Remember, my children," she would tell them every night, her voice filled with both tenderness and steel, "Your worth is not defined by anyone else's expectations. You are strong, capable, and valuable. Never forget that." The girls listened intently. Aisha, the eldest, took her mother's words to heart and vowed to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Mariam, with a heart full of empathy, dreamed of healing the sick and helping those in need. Little Fatima, ever curious, immersed herself in books, seeking to understand the world around her. Years passed, and Ibrahim's life took a downward spiral. His second marriage, meant to give him the son he so desperately wanted, ended in disappointment. His new wife, Halima, left him after several childless years, tired of his bitterness and the constant pressure for a son. Meanwhile, Ibrahim's health began to deteriorate. His strong frame was now frail, his once proud demeanor broken. He sat alone in his crumbling house, filled with regret. News from the village began to reach him about his daughters. Aisha was now a lawyer, fiercely advocating for women's rights. Mariam had become a doctor, serving the rural communities with compassion and dedication. Fatima had grown into an educator, challenging the very patriarchal norms that had once ruled their lives. They were known throughout the region for their strength and achievements, and every time he heard their names, a pang of guilt struck Ibrahim's heart. He had thrown away his true legacy for a fleeting, misguided desire. Zainab's daughters grew into remarkable women, each embodying the strength, wisdom, and independence their mother had instilled in them. They had become the very pillars of change their father had never imagined possible. The irony was not lost on Ibrahim, whose house had fallen silent, devoid of the joy and laughter that filled Zainab's new home on the outskirts of Tambuwal. One cold, windy evening, Ibrahim, now frail and humbled by life, decided to seek out the family he had once cast aside. He could no longer bear the emptiness of his home or the weight of his regrets. He walked slowly, his cane tapping against the dirt path, until he reached Zainab's house. It was modest, but well kept, a testament to the resilience and strength of the woman he had discarded. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. When it opened, he found himself face to face with Aisha. She looked at him with a mixture of shock and guarded emotion. "Father," she said, her voice calm but cool, "what brings you here?" "I have come to seek forgiveness," Ibrahim said, his voice weak, his eyes filled with tears. "I was wrong, Aisha. I see that now. I am an old man who has lost everything, except the hope that my daughters might forgive me." Inside, Zainab stood with Mariam and Fatima. The air was heavy with years of unspoken pain. Ibrahim looked at his daughters, who were now strong, accomplished women. He could barely meet their eyes. "I am sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I was blinded by my desires. I see now the value I threw away, the family I destroyed." The room fell silent. The daughters exchanged glances, their faces a blend of anger, sorrow, and contemplation. Finally, Zainab spoke, her voice steady and wise. "Ibrahim, forgiveness is not a right. It is a gift that must be earned." Aisha, stepping forward, spoke for her sisters. "We will forgive you, Father," she said, her voice unwavering. "But understand this, our worth was never tied to being sons. We were always enough and will always be enough, no matter what anyone says." If you enjoyed this story and found it meaningful, please give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that challenge traditional beliefs and empower individuals to rise above adversity. Thank you for watching, and always remember, your worth is defined by your actions, not by the labels society tries to put on you. Until next time, stay strong and keep inspiring.